Commander Doohan stood at the main viewing window of the Syraxian flagship Swift Thunder *. His thick, armored skin reflected the soft blue light of the nearby nebula. He watched as smaller ships moved around his vessel like busy insects around their nest. Every movement of these ships reminded him of his people's power and their special place in the galaxy. The Syraxians were different from other species. They came from a world that most races would call a nightmare. Their home planet had gravity twice as strong as most habitable worlds. Its air was thick with gases that would kill weaker beings. Storms powerful enough to throw buildings into the air were common. These harsh conditions had made the Syraxians strong. Their bodies were covered in natural armor that could stop most weapons. Their muscles were dense and powerful. Their lungs could filter out poisons that would kill other species in seconds. "Commander," a voice called from behind him. Doohan turned to see Scientific Officer Haynul approaching with a datapad. Like all Syraxians, Haynul moved with careful grace, each step measured to handle their natural strength. "What news, Officer Haynul?" Doohan asked. He noticed worry lines around Haynul's eyes, visible even through his protective scales. "Our deep space sensors have picked up something unusual," Haynul said, holding up the datapad. "We detected signals from Sector 847. It's an area we marked as too dangerous for most species to survive." Doohan took the pad and studied the readings. "Impossible," he muttered. The data showed signs of advanced technology from a planet with extreme conditions. The gravity there was stronger than most worlds. The temperature changed from very hot to very cold. The air contained elements that should kill any living thing. "The signals are clear," Haynul insisted. "Someone is living there. Someone is thriving there." Doohan walked to the ship's main control center, his heavy footsteps echoing on the metal floor. The crew worked at their stations, each member a reminder of their species' strength. For 200 years, the Syraxians had protected the galaxy's weaker races. They were the strong ones, the survivors, the only ones who could live in conditions that would kill others. "Show me everything," Doohan ordered. The main screen lit up with data about the mysterious sector. The more he read, the more his scaled brow furrowed in confusion. "These readings suggest a civilization," he said slowly. "But the conditions, they're even worse than our homeworld in some ways." Haynul nodded. "Yes, Commander. And there's more." He touched the screen, bringing up new information. "We've detected artificial satellites, space debris, and what appear to be primitive space vessels. Whatever lives there isn't just surviving. They're advancing." Doohan felt something he hadn't experienced in years: uncertainty. His people's entire identity was built on being the galaxy's only Deathworlders. They were the protectors, the strong ones. The thought of another species not only surviving but building a civilization in such conditions challenged everything they believed. "Prepare a full report," Doohan ordered, "and keep this information restricted for now. If there really is another species out there like us." He paused, looking out at the stars. "We need to know everything about them before we make our next move." As Haynul left, Doohan remained at the command center, lost in thought. Around him, the ship hummed with power, a testament to Syraxian engineering and strength. But for the first time in his long career, Commander Doohan wondered if his people's pride had blinded them. What else might be out there in the vast darkness of space? What other impossible things might exist beyond their knowledge? The answer, though he didn't know it yet, would change everything his species thought they knew about strength, survival, and their place in the galaxy. Scientific Officer Haynul sat in his private laboratory aboard the Swift Thunder, his eyes fixed on the screen before him. For 3 days straight, he had studied the data from the mysterious planet in Sector 847. The more he learned, the more fascinating and impossible it seemed. "Computer, display atmospheric composition again," he commanded. The screen filled with charts showing gases that should not exist together in a breathable atmosphere. The planet's air contained high levels of oxygen mixed with nitrogen and various trace gases. Such a combination would be highly reactive and dangerous to most known species. Hanul pressed a button on his communication device. "Commander Duhan, please come to the laboratory. I have found something important." Minutes later, Commander Duhan entered the lab. His armored scales gleamed under the bright laboratory lights. "What have you discovered, Officer Hanul?" Hanul gestured to the main screen. "Look at these readings, Commander. This planet experiences temperature swings of over 100 degrees in a single rotation. The gravity is 1.3 times stronger than our homeworld. The atmosphere contains corrosive elements. And yet," he pressed another button, showing new images. The screen displayed pictures of vast cities, sprawling across continents. There were vehicles moving on the ground, in the air, and even crewed vessels in space. Most surprising of all were the images of the inhabitants themselves. "They call themselves humans," Hanul explained. "They appear to have no natural armor, no visible adaptations for their harsh environment. Their bodies seem fragile." Duhan leaned closer to the screen, his scaled brow furrowed in confusion. "How do they survive?" "That's what makes them remarkable," Hanul said, excitement clear in his voice. "They've adapted in ways we never imagined possible. Look at this." He showed images of humans in different environments across their planet. The images showed humans living in frozen wastelands where temperatures dropped far below freezing. Others thrived in deserts hot enough to cook food on bare rock. Some lived high in mountains where the air was thin, while others built cities in valleys far below sea level. "These humans," Hanul continued, "can survive in almost any environment. They don't have natural armor like us, but they created artificial protection. They don't have built-in temperature regulation, so they've invented ways to heat and cool themselves. They're physically weaker than us, yet they've built machines to multiply their strength many times over." Duhan watched the screen as it showed more images. Humans running long distances under hot suns, swimming in freezing waters, climbing sheer cliff faces, and building structures that reached into the clouds. "Their adaptation isn't in their bodies," Hanul explained. "It's in their minds. They see a problem and find a way around it. They've turned their whole planet, harsh as it is, into their home." Commander Duhan stood silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "How advanced are they?" "They're still primitive compared to us," Hanul answered. "They've only recently reached their own moon, but their progress is remarkable. They've accomplished in a few hundred years what took most species thousands." "Prepare a full report for the High Council," Duhan ordered. "And Hanul, include your personal observations. The Council needs to understand that we're not just dealing with another species. We may be dealing with something entirely new." As Duhan left the laboratory, Hanul turned back to his screens. Among all the data and images, one thing stood out: a recording of human children playing in the rain, laughing as water fell from their sky, filled with electricity and sound. They weren't just surviving their harsh world, they were enjoying it. For the first time in his career, Hanul wondered if perhaps the Siraxians had been wrong about what made a species truly strong. Captain Jaiwan's observation ship hung silently in Earth's orbit, hidden behind advanced cloaking technology. For the past week, her team had watched the humans with growing amazement. Each new observation challenged their understanding of what was possible. "Captain, you need to see this," called one of her crew members. "The humans are doing something strange again." Jaiwan moved to the observation screen. It showed a large group of humans running through the streets of the city. They were wearing light clothing and moving at a steady pace under the hot sun. Some were even smiling. "Are they being chased?" Jaiwan asked, searching the scene for threats. "No, Captain," her crew member replied. "According to their information networks, this is called a marathon. They run 42 kilometers for fun." Jaiwan blinked her armored eyes in surprise. On her homeworld, running such distances would only be done in emergencies, yet these humans chose to do it voluntarily. Later that day, Jai-1 prepared her daily report for Commander Duhan. She included recordings from different parts of Earth. One showed humans diving deep into their oceans without protective shells. Another showed them climbing frozen mountains with only thin layers of artificial protection. A third showed them eating foods that contained substances toxic to most species. Their adaptability goes beyond what we imagined, she wrote in her report. Today we observe humans in a place called Death Valley, where temperatures reach 50 degrees Celsius. Hours later, we watched others skiing on frozen mountains at minus 40 degrees Celsius. They moved between these extreme environments with ease. As Jai-1 finished her report, her second-in-command, Officer Yun Seo, entered the observation room. "Captain, we've detected something unusual. The humans are purposely entering high-temperature rooms for relaxation. They call them saunas." Jai-1 accessed the new data. The recordings showed humans sitting calmly in rooms hot enough to kill most alien species. They emerged covered in sweat, looking pleased. "Send a tissue sample analysis to Science Officer Hae-Nul," Jai-1 ordered. "There must be something special about their biology that we're missing." The results came back several hours later. Hae-Nul's message was simple. Their cells are ordinary. Their strength lies elsewhere. That evening, Jai-1 watched as a human city transformed from day to night. The humans had created artificial light to push back the darkness. They had built machines to cool their buildings in summer and warm them in winter. When their bodies proved too weak for a task, they simply invented tools to do it for them. They don't adapt their bodies to their environment, Jai-1 realized. They adapt their environment to their needs. She added a personal note to her daily report. "Commander Duhan, I believe we have been thinking about this wrong. We Syraxians evolved to survive our harsh world. Our strength comes from our bodies. But these humans, they take hostile environments and reshape them. They see limits not as barriers, but as challenges to overcome. They aren't just surviving their death world. They're mastering it." As her ship continued its silent orbit, Jai-1 watched a group of human children playing in a park. They were launching themselves down a metal slope, squealing with delight as gravity pulled them down. Somewhere else, humans were diving from high places into water for sport. Others were racing vehicles at dangerous speeds. "They don't just endure danger," she whispered to herself. "They embrace it. They turn it into something new." For the first time, she felt something beyond curiosity about humans. She felt respect. Ambassador Yoon-hee stood in the meeting room of the neutral space station, waiting for the human delegation to arrive. The room had been carefully prepared with environmental controls to suit both species. She watched through the viewing window as the human ship docked with precise movements that surprised her. For a young species, they showed remarkable skill in space navigation. The door opened, and Commander Park Ta-woo of Earth's United Space Command entered with his team. Yoon-hee noticed they wore simple uniforms, not the heavy protective gear most species needed. They moved with a casual confidence that seemed strange for beings with such fragile bodies. "Welcome," Yoon-hee said, using the translation device. "I am Ambassador Yoon-hee of the Syraxian Empire." Commander Park smiled, a gesture that would have been threatening on most worlds, but somehow seemed friendly on his face. "Thank you for this opportunity, Ambassador. We are honored to represent Earth in this first official meeting." As they sat down to talk, Yoon-hee noticed something odd. The humans showed no signs of discomfort in the station's artificial gravity, which had been set to Syraxian standard, much higher than Earth's natural gravity. "You seem very comfortable in these conditions," she observed. Commander Park nodded. "We train for various gravity conditions. Our bodies adapt quickly." He said this as if it were ordinary, not the remarkable feat it was. Their discussion moved to trade possibilities and cultural exchange when the station's warning systems suddenly activated. Red lights flashed as the computer announced, "Warning, approaching solar storm. Radiation levels rising." The Syraxian security team moved to protect their ambassador, but they froze in surprise when they saw the humans' reaction. Instead of showing fear, the human team immediately pulled out portable devices and began working. "We've detected a weakness in the station's radiation shielding," Commander Park said calmly. "With your permission, we can help strengthen it. We have experience with solar radiation on Earth." Yoon-hee watched in amazement as the humans worked with the station's systems. They moved quickly and efficiently, using their smaller size to reach places the Seraxians couldn't. Within minutes, they had reinforced the shielding using a combination of their own equipment and the station's resources. "On Earth, we deal with solar flares regularly," one of the human engineers explained as she worked. "Our atmosphere protects us from most radiation, but we've learned to handle it in space." The crisis passed quickly, but it left a lasting impression on Yoon-hee. These humans hadn't just survived the danger. They had treated it as a problem to be solved. They hadn't relied on natural protection like the Seraxians did, but instead used their minds and tools to overcome the threat. Later, as she prepared her report for the Seraxian High Council, Yoon-hee wrote, "The humans' greatest strength isn't in their bodies. It's in their ability to see solutions where we see only threats. They don't avoid dangers, they learn from them. Every challenge they face becomes a lesson they use to grow stronger." She looked out at the human ship, still docked at the station. "Perhaps," she wrote, "we have been wrong about what makes a species truly powerful. The humans have shown us that adaptation comes in many forms, and not all strength lies in natural armor or physical power." As she finished her report, Yoon-hee received a message from Commander Park, suggesting regular meetings to share knowledge about surviving in harsh environments. The message ended with a simple invitation. "We would be honored to show you Earth. Sometimes the best way to understand a species is to walk in their world." John looked out over the valley below. The sun was just starting to set, painting the sky in beautiful shades of orange and pink. He took a deep breath, enjoying the peaceful moment. It had been a long journey to get here, but he finally felt like things were looking up. As the last rays of sunlight faded, John made his way back to the small cabin he was staying in. He lit a fire in the old stone fireplace and sat down in a worn armchair. He pulled a folded piece of paper out of his pocket, the letter from his sister that had brought him here. He unfolded the paper and read over her words again, even though he nearly had them memorized by now. She wrote about their parents and how much they missed him. She said the family farm was struggling and they could really use his help. She ended the letter by pleading with him to come home. John sighed and rubbed his forehead. He had left home 5 years ago, eager to make his own way in the world, but things hadn't gone as planned. He jumped from one job to the next, never really finding his place. The city had worn him down and left him feeling lost and alone. Coming back to the valley felt like admitting defeat in some ways, but his sister's letter also gave him a sense of purpose again. Maybe this is what he needed, to go back to his roots and reconnect with what really mattered. He was nervous about seeing his family again after all this time, but he knew it was the right thing to do. John folded up the letter and put it back in his pocket. He added another log to the fire and watched the flames dance. Tomorrow he would head down into town and start making plans to return home. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of hope. As he climbed into the creaky bed that night, his mind drifted to memories of his childhood, running through fields with his sister, learning to drive the old tractor with his dad, eating his mom's homemade pie. Those simple times felt so far away now. But maybe, John thought as he drifted off to sleep, he could find his way back to them again. Maybe going home was the fresh start he needed. The next morning, John woke up early. He made a strong pot of coffee and sat on the small porch, watching the sun rise over the misty hills. He heard a vehicle coming up the dirt road and stood up to see who it was. To his surprise, a familiar old blue truck came into view. It parked in front of the cabin, and John's father stepped out. John stood frozen in shock as his dad walked toward him, a tentative smile on his weathered face. "Son," his dad said, his voice gruff with emotion. It's good to see you." "Dad? What are you doing here?" John sputtered. "How did you find me?" His father held up a piece of paper. It was the letter from John's sister. "Your sister found your address. I hope you don't mind me coming." John shook his head, still stunned. "No, of course not. I'm just surprised." "I know it's been a long time," his dad said. "Too long. I wanted to come see you, talk to you, before you make any decisions about coming back." John nodded, not trusting himself to speak. His father looked at him, his eyes filled with love and regret. "I'm sorry, John. I'm sorry if I made you feel like you had to leave. The farm, the family, it's important, but it's not more important than you." "I see that now," his dad said. John felt tears welling up in his eyes. He had carried the weight of disappointing his father for so long. To hear him say those words lifted a burden he didn't even realize he'd been carrying. His dad stepped forward and wrapped John in a tight hug. John hugged him back, letting the tears flow freely. For the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. As they separated, his dad clapped him on the shoulder. "So, what do you say? Will you come home?" John looked at his father, at the sincerity and hope in his eyes. He took a deep breath and nodded. "Yeah, Dad, I'm coming home." His father smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Together, they walked into the cabin, ready to start the journey back to the family and the farm, back to the life John had always been meant to live. The end. John and his father spent the morning packing up John's few belongings from the cabin. They loaded everything into the old blue truck. John took one last look around, feeling a mix of nostalgia and excitement. The drive back to the family farm took a few hours. John stared out the window, watching the familiar landscape roll by. His father filled him in on everything that had happened in the 5 years John had been gone. The farm had faced some hard times, but the family had stuck together. As they pulled into the long gravel driveway of the farm, John felt his heart racing. The old farmhouse looked just like he remembered. The red barn stood tall in the distance. Memories came flooding back. John's mother and sister came running out of the house. There were tears and hugs all around. John apologized for staying away so long. His family assured him that all that mattered was that he was home now. Over a big family dinner that night, they began to make plans. John would take over some of the responsibilities on the farm to help lighten the load on his aging parents. His sister was thrilled to have his help and support. In the weeks that followed, John threw himself into life on the farm. He woke up early to milk the cows and feed the chickens. He mended fences and repaired equipment. In the evenings, he sat on the porch with his family, talking and laughing like old times. Slowly but surely, the farm began to thrive again. John's hard work and fresh perspective brought new life to the old place. His father watched with pride as John took on more leadership. As the seasons changed, so did John. The heavy weight he had carried for so long began to lift. The sense of purpose and connection he had been searching for, he found right here, in the place he had once been so eager to leave. One crisp autumn evening, as John walked the land at sunset, he realized he was happy, truly happy, for the first time in years. He knew there would still be challenges ahead, but he finally felt ready to face them, rooted in the love of his family and the land that had raised him. Looking out over the fields that stretched to the horizon, John felt a deep sense of belonging. He was home, in every sense of the word. And he knew, deep in his heart, that he would never leave again. This was where he was meant to be, where his story would continue on the farm, with his family, tending the land that was his heritage and his future. As the sun dipped below the horizon, John turned back toward the warmly lit farmhouse, where his family waited. With a smile, he stepped forward, ready to embrace whatever tomorrow would bring, knowing he would face it here, on this land with these people, the ones who loved him and whom he loved in return. This was his life now, his choice, and he knew it was the right one. The farm boy had finally found his way home, and in doing so, he had found himself. As he walked toward the house, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. No more running, no more searching. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. And for the first time in a long time, John knew that everything was going to be all right. Better than all right. He had found his way back to his roots, back to the life he was born to live. With a lightness in his step and a joy in his heart, John joined his family on the porch, ready to begin this new chapter, here on the farm that had always been waiting for him, here in the warm embrace of the people who had never stopped loving him, even when he had lost sight of the way. This was home, and John was finally, truly, back where he belonged. The end. Years passed on the farm. John settled into a comfortable routine, working side by side with his family. The farm prospered under their care and hard work. John found a deep satisfaction in the simple but meaningful life he had built. As he worked the land, John often reflected on the journey that had brought him back home. He realized that in running away, he had been searching for something he thought he couldn't find here. But in returning, he discovered that everything he needed had been here all along: love, purpose, belonging. One spring morning, as John repaired a fence at the edge of a pasture, a car pulled up the long driveway. A young woman stepped out, looking around uncertainly. John walked over to greet her. "Can I help you?" he asked kindly. The woman smiled nervously. "I hope so. I'm looking for the Thompson family farm." John nodded. "You've found it. I'm John Thompson." The woman's eyes widened. "John." "I'm Sarah Miller." The name sounded familiar, but John couldn't quite place it. Sarah saw his confusion and hurried to explain. "You might not remember me. We were in school together before you left. I had a big crush on you back then," she admitted, blushing. Suddenly, memories came flooding back. Sarah, the quiet girl who always sat in the front of the class. They had been friendly, but John had been too wrapped up in his own dreams of leaving to really notice her. "Sarah, of course. It's great to see you," John said warmly. "What brings you back to town?" Sarah explained that she had been living in the city, working as a teacher, but she had never felt truly at home there. Something kept pulling her back to the rural town she had grown up in. "I drove past the farm on my way into town, and I just felt this urge to stop," she said. "I'm not even sure why." John smiled. He understood that feeling all too well. Over the next few weeks, Sarah became a regular visitor to the farm. She would help out with chores, and in the evenings, she and John would sit on the porch, talking late into the night. They discovered they had more in common than they ever realized in school. Like John, Sarah had felt restless and out of place in the city. She admired the life John had built on the farm. Slowly, almost without realizing it, John found himself falling for Sarah. Her kindness, her gentle spirit, the way she seemed to understand him in a way no one else ever had. One evening, as they watched the sunset over the fields, John turned to Sarah. "I'm really glad you stopped by the farm that day," he said softly. Sarah smiled, her eyes shining. "Me too." Under the fading light of the sun, they shared their first kiss. It felt like coming home, like the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. In the years that followed, Sarah became a constant presence on the farm. She and John were married in a simple ceremony in the meadow behind the house. They worked the land together and raised a family, teaching their children the value of hard work, family, and the simple joys of life on the farm. John often thought back to that fateful day when his father had come to bring him home. He marveled at how a single decision, a single moment, could change the course of a life so profoundly. Looking out over the farm, his arm around Sarah, his children playing at their feet, John felt a deep sense of gratitude. For the land that sustained them, for the family that loved him, for the second chance he had been given. He had once run from this life, thinking it wasn't enough. But now he knew, with absolute certainty, that it was everything. This was where he belonged, where his story had always been meant to unfold. Under the wide open sky, surrounded by the gentle rhythms of the farm, John finally understood the true meaning of home, and he knew, without a doubt, that he would never leave again. The end. The years passed peacefully on the farm. John and Sarah's children grew into strong, capable adults. They learned the value of hard work and family, just as their parents had. When the time came, they were ready to take over the farm, allowing John and Sarah to step back and enjoy the fruits of their labor. As John grew older, he often sat on the porch, watching the sun rise and set over the fields he had tended for so many years. Sarah would join him, her hand in his, a lifetime of love and shared memories between them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, John turned to Sarah. "I've been thinking," he said softly, "about the choices we make in life, about how one decision can change everything." Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Like when you chose to come back to the farm." John smiled. "Exactly. I was so lost back then, so sure that I needed something more. But what I really needed was right here, waiting for me to find my way back." "And you did," Sarah said, squeezing his hand. "You found your way home, to the place and the people who needed you. And look at all the good that came from that one choice." John looked out over the farm, at the sturdy house, the thriving fields, the grandchildren playing in the yard. He thought of the countless lives this farm had touched, the generations it had sustained. "I'm grateful," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Grateful for this life, for you, for our family, for the chance to be a part of something so much bigger than myself." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. "We're all part of a story, I think," she said thoughtfully. "And it's up to us to choose what kind of story we want to tell. With our lives, with our choices." John nodded, thinking of his own story. The boy who ran away, the man who found his way back, the husband, the father, the farmer, the legacy he would leave behind. "I think," he said slowly, "I think I chose a good story. A story of love and family and the land. A story of coming home." Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with tears and love. "The best story," she agreed. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The story of their lives, of the farm, stretched out behind them and ahead of them, a tapestry woven of countless moments and choices, of love and labor and the unbreakable bonds of family. And as the night settled over the farm, John knew that this was a story that would continue long after he was gone. A story that would be told by his children and his children's children, a story of a family and a farm and the love that sustained them both. It was a simple story, perhaps, but it was his. And in the end, that was all that mattered. That he had lived a life worth telling, a life filled with meaning and purpose and love. Under the starry sky, John closed his eyes, peace in his heart. He had found his place in the world, had built a life and a legacy on the land that had always called him home. And he knew, with the certainty of a life well lived, that he had indeed chosen the best story of all. The end.